Where does your money actually go? I mean, seriously, think about it. When you deposit a paycheck, or contribute to a retirement fund, or just stash some cash away for the future, it doesn't just sit there gathering dust in a vault somewhere. No, it enters this massive, high-stakes world of global asset management. We are literally talking about trillions of dollars moving around the globe right this second, shaping entire industries, fueling economies, and really dictating our collective future.
So to manage all of that immense wealth, the industry relies on one absolute game changer of a strategy, and that is diversification. You can think of it kind of like a perfectly balanced financial diet. To manage risk and ensure long-term health, portfolios are spread across multiple, distinct asset classes. We're balancing equities for long-term growth, fixed income for that steady stability, hedge funds for highly specialized strategies, venture capital to fuel those disruptive tech startups, and private equity for corporate restructuring. By spreading the capital around like this, a sudden shock to one sector won't completely wipe out the broader portfolio. It's a survival tactic.
Welcome to today's Explainer. We are going on a really fascinating journey right into the anatomy of modern asset management. We're going to look at exactly how this massive wealth is managed, how it's diversified, and, most importantly, how the incredibly powerful entities managing all of this money are evaluated and held accountable in today's complex world.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover diversifying the investment portfolio. Second, enter the SASB standards. Third, trust, ethics, and diversity. And fourth, ESG and financed emissions. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. Diversifying the investment portfolio.
So, who is this industry actually serving? Well, it's a huge mix ranging from massive institutional pension funds all the way to everyday retail investors and high net worth individuals. Now, here's the kicker. Anyone managing this money is bound by something called a fiduciary responsibility. This is a critical legal and ethical mandate to act strictly in the best interest of the client. And honestly, it anchors everything we're looking at today. The absolute primary mechanism for honoring that duty and protecting clients from crazy market volatility is custom diversification. You'll see massive firms competing on management fees and pure scale, while smaller boutique firms can compete on precisely customizing these diverse portfolios to match a single client's exact risk tolerance.
Moving on to Section 2. Enter the SASB standards.
So, we know how the money is invested, but how do we actually measure if it's being done well? Well, enter the SASB standards. These are now under the stewardship of the International Sustainability Standards Board, or ISSB for short. You can think of these standards as the ultimate nutritional label for our diversified investment diet. They provide a highly precise framework for asset managers to report on sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Basically, they tell us if the way our money is being managed is actually sound, ethical, and sustainable for the long haul.
Now, you have to understand, this marks a massive shift. Traditional investing was almost exclusively about one thing: maximizing returns through those diverse asset classes we just talked about. But modern ESG investing, which stands for environmental, social, and governance, recognizes a completely new reality. Managing non-financial forms of capital is actually contributing to real market value now. Ignoring systemic risks like climate change or social instability, that could lead to seriously diminished portfolio returns over the long term and eventually a massive outflow of assets.
All right, Section 3, Trust, Ethics, and Diversity. But before we even touch on the environmental side of things, we really have to look at the people pulling the levers. Because at the end of the day, managing money is fundamentally about managing trust. The SASB standards actually track what they call identified decision makers. That's essentially the senior managers, directors, or anybody holding individual accountability related to these investment businesses. The standard specifically requires firms to track and disclose the regulatory records of these extremely powerful individuals. Have they been hit with consumer complaints, private civil litigations, regulatory proceedings? By tracking all of this, the standard ensures that customers are actually getting fair, transparent advice and that conflicts of interest are kept strictly in check. And it's not just the top brass. The standard also strictly measures the makeup of the workforce itself. Entities have to disclose gender and diversity representation across 4 distinct tiers: executive management, non-executive management, professionals, and all other employees. Now, why do this? Well, it is not just an ethical consideration. The evidence actually suggests that entities with more diverse groups of employees might legitimately enhance the risk-return characteristics of their portfolios. It makes sense, right? Diversity expands the talent pool and sharpens operational efficiency.
To make sure this tracking is actually rigorous and not just corporate fluff, institutions have to use exact, standardized reporting formats directly from the SASB documentation. This completely prevents vague, feel-good claims about inclusion and forces a brutally transparent accounting of exactly who is making the decisions at every single level of the firm.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 4, ESG and financed emissions. So, asset managers have a few distinct ways to actually build these ESG factors into their decision-making. They might use negative screening, which is basically just excluding harmful industries from a portfolio altogether. On the flip side, they might use positive screening to actively pick the best-in-class companies in a specific sector. Then you have sustainability-themed investing, which proactively funnels capital into specific solutions. Think of funds explicitly dedicated to scaling clean energy or sustainable agriculture. And finally, there's systematic ESG integration, where material ESG factors are explicitly built right into the core financial modeling and valuation of an asset.
Now, when we apply all of this to climate risk, we really have to talk about greenhouse gas emissions scopes. It builds up step by step. Step 1 is Scope 1, direct entity emissions from a firm's own day-to-day operations. Step 2 is Scope 2, indirect energy emissions, like the electricity they purchase just to keep the lights on in the office. But here's the thing. For a massive asset manager, Scopes 1 and 2 are usually a drop in the bucket compared to the colossal footprint of Step 3, which is Scope 3 financed emissions.
So the crucial point here is financed emissions. What does that actually mean? It represents the total greenhouse gas emissions attributed to all of those diverse assets the firm is managing. If a firm manages a portfolio heavily invested in high-emission industries, well, those emissions belong to the firm's carbon footprint. Measuring this serves as a critical indicator of a firm's true, real-world exposure to climate-related risks, like sudden carbon taxes or massive shifts in green technology. The SASB standard requires firms to explicitly disclose their absolute gross financed emissions, showing exactly how much of their total assets are included in that final calculation. And that brings us to our final thought. We've seen how trillions of dollars are diversified across equities, hedge funds, and private equity just to protect against financial shocks. But as these SASB standards clearly reveal, true risk management today requires looking at trust, it requires looking at diversity, and it absolutely requires looking at the real-world emissions those dollars are financing. So the next time you think about where your money goes, ask yourself, is your portfolio just diversified, or is it truly responsible? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.